Okay, on this video, what I would like to talk to you about is how we even got involved in this project. And my name's Bob Johnson. I started Medfex back in 1977, I think. And over the years, I've been very interested in electrotherapy and electromagnetic forces. I was sitting at my desk and started receiving quite a few phone calls from people who were using electrotherapy, and they were doing things to help athletes heal quicker. They were doing things to prevent one having to get shoulder, hip, knee replacement surgery, and so on and so forth. And they called up and they had seen our Infrax Plus on the internet in some of our videos. And they said, this thing looks like it is very similar to some of the situations we're working with. Will your machine work? And through that discussion with multiple people, and I was listening to the logic of other people that sell equipment and other types of equipment, it dawned on me. As I say, you know, these things that are being told is what is special about a piece of equipment. It's just not holding up. Now, most of the different types of equipment, if there is a healthy benefit from using them, one of the first things one will say is the manufacturer or the sales rep will say it's because it increases blood flow. Well, that's generic across the board on practically every piece of equipment you see. Now, inherent in increasing blood flow is, you would assume that means something's coming in that's good and something's being removed that was not good. It's a generic statement. They would then come up and say, well, we can reduce swelling, edema. Well, anytime you take a negative charge or a same charge, and it's a physics thing, if you have swelling and we put a negative charge where there's a buildup of lactic acid, then that lactic acid, when you look at it atomically, it has more electrons than protons. Remembering, electrons are negative charges and protons are positive charges. If you look at an atom, whether it's negative or positive, it's about, does it have more or less protons and electrons? That's generic. That's generic to plants. Just generic to animals, insects. That's generic to life. Our bodies are nothing but biological composition of millions of cells and maybe a trillion atoms that are working together for this life form we call a human. We have other life forms, trees, plants, insects, dogs. It all comes back to the basics. And then as I started looking into this, they asked us to create a machine, which we did. But I knew once we created the machine, I said, you know, the problem is this is not working. We have to come up with a better answer. What I have seen in the past, and I'll draw you a couple of pictures here, is back in actually the late 1960s, early 70s, there was a beautiful little machine, and that's your baseline. That just means the machine's not on. And then the electricity would come on, and then it would slow down a little bit, and then it would crease back up, and then it would turn off. That is actually called a dual peak. You see the two peaks? Spike wave. Well, this was known as what is called PGS. PGS just stands for pulsed galvanic stimulation. I'll just go STEM. All right, this was used to make bed sores heal. And it was extremely effective. That unit, PGS, which was actually a company called Dynawave, Rudy Kessner, wonderful person, he started this and did an extremely wonderful job on helping people that had bad bed sores and they weren't healing. As long as they had proper nutrition, then he was able to make the bed sores heal. That was great. One day I asked Rudy, though, and this was about 1980, I said, Rudy, how in the world of the literally billions, and that's with a B, I'm saying billions, of the billions of waveforms you can come up with, how in the world did you decide this particular waveform would make bed sores? And he sort of chuckled at me. And once he chuckled at me, he says, Bob, it was really simple. He says, I went to my local electronic repair store. I needed back then they were solid state circuits. He goes, I needed about 200. And I said, what have you got that I can put into my machine that I can buy 200 of and they don't cost me very much money? He says, it just happened it made a dual peak spike waveform. He says, it wasn't that I knew what to do, it was what I could buy. He says, and after I got this was one of the things we found out. That put me on alert. And I went, maybe it's not waveform. And I was very fortunate to have, she's now deceased, a lady named Sue Flowers, who was in charge of physical therapy, University of North Carolina. And she called me in one day back when TENS units were very popular. And everybody's talking about waveforms and so on and so forth. Well, she sat me down one day, and Sue would never have touched an electrotherapy device. That wasn't her thing. But she says, Bob, I got to tell you something. She goes, when it's all said and done, here's my personal belief. She says, my background is, I had an undergraduate degree in physics. I then got my master's degree in physical therapy. But because of my physics background, when it's all said and done, when you're trying to figure out what is making these wonderful things happen, including elimination of pain, it's going to be about polarity, whether it's a positive or a negative charge. And I've always remembered that. And a couple of 3 years later, they're talking about opioid peptides, and it makes the body produce painkillers and enkephalins, endorphins. That's part of the opioid peptide group. Blah, blah, blah. Sounds good, just doesn't work in practice. But that was something that stuck with me, plus with Rudy. So you go through these progressions of types of instruments that do wonderful things, but yet nobody's coming up with an answer as to why. Let me show you a couple of more waveforms. Back then, if you're trying to get rid of pain, they use what's called a biphasic square waveform. Biphasic meaning those are positive. And then when it comes down like this, it goes like this. Boom, that's a negative charge. Whatever amount you have here, you have the same amount here. This is basically a TENS machine. That's used to control pain. Then we come back a little bit later, and we come back, and now instead of showing you the waveform, this is going to be a bone. And this bone is broken. And we have another bone right here. My art's not the best. But we've got a problem. This bone will not grow back together. And the problem we have is in the person's leg. And this was common in motorcycle crash accidents. If you can't get that bone to grow back together, you're going to have to amputate. Don't want to do that. Dr. Bassett at Duke and Dr. Robert Becker, who wrote the book Body Electric, they got tired of chopping. And so they said, is there a way we can make a unionization occur? And if you ever have a chance to read the Body Electric, and that's one of the slides or one of the things you see on our videos, a picture of the book. They said, how can we do it? So they came out with some machines over time. And one of the machines, they would implant, let me change colors on you here. They would go into a surgical operation and basically put an electrode on this side and an electrode on this side. All right. Robert Becker looked at injury and what happens electrically. So when a bone is growing together, you basically have a positive and a negative charge. And this one has a negative positive. What happens? They attract. What happens when they're not unionizing is they have the same charge. So they repel. There is no growth. So they would take a stimulator, and they would, or in this particular, let me get my little wipe. They would take a stimulator, and they would check it, and they would change the polarity, and now we have an attraction. That electrode, those two electrodes that were planted on the bone, I'll use this to fill it in. Let me use green. Maybe that's easier to see. Next thing you know, these guys are growing back together. So it unionizes, you don't have to chop. Well, there's another company that came out. And they said, let's do the same thing. Let's see if we can do it even better. And this time, let's not do surgery. Let's just use and put on the outside, if I can find all my pins here, I got more pins. If we can go to the outside on the leg, and let's put an electrode out here. Let me make my color again. Let's put an electrode outside on the skin. Let's not have to do surgery. And let's see if we can't make it work. It worked. Well, wait a minute. Another company comes out. They specialized in neck injuries. And your problem you have with neck injuries is you got these vertebrae. They've had a terrible accident. Something's broken. You definitely do not want anything to happen that will affect the spine, because we do not want paralysis. So one of the companies actually came out and they would put a little cast around the neck. And in this case, it wasn't a question of not healing. It was more of a question of, we need to get you healed quick, so there is no danger of paralysis. But what they did inside the cast is they turned around and put what is called a circumduction coil. They put inside the casting material a coil. And this coil changed the electromagnetic field. And guess what? Heals faster. So here's the problem. We've got some solutions. This company claims it's a circumduction and it's an electromagnetic field. This one does it externally. Another one does it internally. These two generally claim they've got some type of waveform that affects this change. And then lo and behold, sitting right up here, there was a fella. His name was Dr. Joe Kahn. And Joe was in Long Island, New York. Joe was a guy back in that always did not, he looked for help. My job as a physical therapist is to help my patient. What do I have to do to help my patient? And he would do what he thought was necessary to help his patient, no matter what the prevailing rules were. And Joe goes, you know what? These devices were basically renting at $2,500. And these are $1970. And a lot of people couldn't afford it. So Joe took a simple old TENS unit, put it on the outside, just as this one, and he got the same type results. And it was published about 1983 in the American Journal of Physical Therapy. He said, I can take a TENS unit, do this and do that, and this is the stuff that makes it works just as well. Well, these types of arguments or products and discussions is what made, say, something's not right. Go back to Sue Flowers. There has to be a better reason, because as with waveforms, there are literally billions. And I know from talking with Rudy how that one came. I know a little bit about that one. I know a lot about these. And I know about other things. One being, and I want to show you this one, by Dr. Giovanni De Domenico, who was the world's foremost expert. And this is what many of you watching this are going to be familiar with. About 1953, there was a type of current proposed called interferential current. Here's all interferential current is in the physics world. We would have, and I'll just use this for sake, an electrode here, an electrode here, and it emits, it goes basically off and on anywhere between 2,000 to 10,000 times a second per second. Now, off and on, you see rate, frequency, no, you can't read that, and PPS, pulses per second, or cycles per CPS. Those are nothing but how many times is the machine going off and on every second. That's all it stands for. So they throw terms at you, but that's what it is. Then you would take another set of electrodes and put them here, and you put them here. Well, here's what happens. This machine goes off and on. Remember, electrons come out of one and have to go to another. Your machine's stuck out here. It's got some wires connect. It's got a wire that comes back. Anytime you do an electrical current, and this particularly applies in the human body. Our human body is nothing but a series of closed circuits, and we depend upon sending out. The brain needs to send a message, but it needs to get feedback as to what went on after it sent the message. Now, in muscles, that's called alpha and gamma motor neurons. One is the receiver, one is the feedback. So if you have an upper motor neuron disturbance because you're in spasticity, someone will say, well, that's an upper motor neuron. May not be. It may be the upper motor neuron, the brain sending the right signal. Problem is, it's not getting the feedback. So it's not truly an upper motor neuron disturbance. It's a disturbance in not completing the circuit. So the brain knows, hey, you can cool it. It's working. If you don't give the brain the knowledge and you do it through a feedback loop, then the brain doesn't know to quit doing what it was doing. That's what interferential is similar to. So current comes out of here, and I'll put negatives because it's a flow of electrons. It goes to here, it goes back in the machine. It's doing this about 4,000 times a second. All right, now, up here, we got channel 2. This down here was channel 1. I know my drawings are terrible. I'm waiting for the video answers coming back. Can you learn how to write? I know that. But here's channel 2. All right, channel 2 is actually going to fire between 4,001 to 4,150 PPS pulses per second. And folks, there's no magic to the numbers. I'm just trying to discuss the interferential concept. When you get to specific products, the claim will be magic in the numbers. As you go through these videos, I don't believe that's true. Now, there are some elements of that, but as a general rule, you're not really stuck to a crystal ball. Now, when this machine comes off, again, we've got a flow of current from that electrode to this one. And in the physical world, and we're discussing physics, what goes on here in the middle is you have currents crisscrossing. So when this leaves right here, it's got 100% of power. Let's say when it gets here, it's only got 50% of power. When it gets down here, for sake of argument, it's got 1% of. This one over here, I'll start from here, it's easier to see. When it leaves, there's 100% of power. Then in the middle, there's only 50% of power, and there's only 1% here. Now, what just happened? At this juncture, there's a crisscross. So you're taking power from here, and you're literally combining the two and creating a whole new current. That is the basis of interferential therapy. With interferential therapy, what you are actually creating, these outside the body, and I'm taking the physics is simple on this. The pictures you see are done physically in vitro, outside the body, where they can control everything. Once you get in the body, it's a whole different ball game. But what is actually going on here is you have this crisscross pattern. So anything outside the body, we call that exogenous. Big word. What does it mean, outside the body? Once you get here in the body and you have this crisscross, then something brand new starts. It is called endogenous, or it's a new current that is created within the body that's making the difference. And that is basically the basis of what goes on interferentially. Now, interferential for pain and healing is about 1953 over in Germany, I believe was where it started, and is the most used form in the hospital and clinic of electrotherapy for pain, in some healing, in abdominal issues such as constipation, urinary incontinency. There's a whole world of uses. Problem is, we haven't understood what it is. Albert Szent-Gyorgyi, Dr. Giovanni De Domenico, the combination of paying attention to what was going on started this process. Now, after I had talked with many people on many different subjects about electrotherapy and got into the physics side, one of the things that hit me was, how can you explain when we have the new Infrax FRM? I know we can achieve the same results, but how do you explain it? Because we need real answers so that you can take all of these situations and you can fine-tune them and do an even better job. And that also includes prevention of cancer. That also includes different hosts. There's 60-some autoimmune diseases that appear to be based upon an electron imbalance within the body. Well, the one person that I settled on that seemed to pull it all together was this Dr. Albert Szent-Gyorgyi. And it was in 1962 he published a book called The Principles of Subatomic Medicine. I believe that's the name of it. I've got a picture of it. But he also, in 1957, had a work called Bioenergetics. And Bioenergetics introduces the concept of the evolution of water within the body and the evolution of how enzymes and hormones and electrons and atoms and molecules, how our body's very customized to this. Water is a terrible thing to use in physics to figure out what goes on. There's too many problems with water. But inside the body, it's the major thing. But Albert Szent-Gyorgyi had, in his book Bioenergetics, he had a great quote. And he simply was that research is to see what everybody has seen and think what nobody has thought. Now that was a profound statement, because Albert Szent-Gyorgyi was trying to say, and did say in 1962, that the process of healing, of maintenance of health, and sickness prevention were a process of electron distribution. And he says we have to look back at what is going on with the basics of life. And absolute basic of life is photons, energy from the sun, hits the earth and excites electrons. That is the basics. Sounds very simple, but that's the basics. And there's plenty of good videos up on quantum mechanics and quantum physics that you can get into the in vitro interpretations. The in vivo, inside the body, is a little more difficult. But this is just to get you started. And now the next video, let's look at electrons and start establishing what it is that is going on electrically that is changing the body and helping heal and prevent sickness. Thanks for watching this video. Let's go to the next video I'm pointing at. Thanks for watching.
At MedFacts, our priority is to educate and inform on topics such as pain relief, sports performance, injury rehab, nutrition, antioxidants, electron supplementation, and electrotherapy. We carry a complete line of electrotherapy devices and accessories, including interferential, TENS, ultrasound, muscle stimulators, electrodes, and more. We are excited about being on the cutting edge of electrotherapy research.